Um, Here's what I think on Greyboxing. Greyboxing is kind of interesting in the aspect of, yes, you can do some games with Greyboxing, but there's some games you cannot do with Greyboxing. For example, like if you're doing something like a 3D sort of game, and you're doing some weird advanced like rope mechanics, Greyboxing's not gonna help. However, right, you can do like basic low poly models where you kind of have an idea it's an arm, right? You can't really do arms on Greyboxing, but you can do kind of like a basic sort of art design where you have an idea, oh, it's a lasso, or you're using your there's a difference in testing mechanics and saying it's fun with graphics. There is, I think there is a difference. I would say Greyboxing is fun to a certain limit. You can do Greyboxing like design and prototyping to a certain point where you kind of like have a general idea. It's like, okay, this is like a player, or this is kind of like a basic player, right? Or this is kind of like a building, or it's gonna be a collision. Then you go, okay, that makes sense. Like if I were doing like a specific building, I would Greyboxes. This is fine, right? But if I'm doing the player, I wouldn't Greybox. So there's things that you can Greybox, and there's things I wouldn't Greybox. Like if I'm trying to do an advanced mechanic, for example, that, you know, that aspect of using a rope, for example, or a lasso, or something where you're doing some sort of different aspect, I would probably not do a Greyboxing, because maybe the player will interpret it, oh, is this kind of like are you like kind of like a cube character that you're using a rope? You kind of want to have like a bland, but not a cube, a bland art aspect. It doesn't necessarily have to be boring, or it doesn't have to look ugly. It could look decent enough where you have an idea, okay, I see what he's trying to make, right? It doesn't have to be like specifically perfect, right? It could be good enough where you can say he's walking, or he's doing this sort of player animation. Greyboxing is good to a limit where you can say, yeah, I can see how you're trying to implement it that way, but it has a limit for sure, right? Because sometimes the player might want to interpret it in a way, like I don't want the player to know, oh, this is not a building, this is a box, or it's going to be some sort of collision, right? Or maybe this is going to be a box and you can destroy it. So you want the player to be interpreted, oh, is this something destroyable? For example, this box. Is this something I can destroy, or is it different from this big building here? You want some sort of way of like telling the player, yes, you can destroy the box, right? But you can't destroy the building, for example, like this building. That's something you have to be careful with Greyboxing. It works well implementing it, but later on, like if you want to release it to the public, then you would have to kind of like put it in. Greyboxing should only be for illustration purposes, meant for focusing on functionality rather than aesthetics appeal. Like cutting the wood from a table before you sand it to paint. Yeah, you're right. Obviously, you're not gonna, like you said, you're not gonna cut wood and you're not gonna show it off to somebody. Say, hey, what do you think of this wood? What? It's just wood, right? You don't care about wood. You want to show something where it's like bland. Well, what do you think of this chair? It's not, well, it doesn't have any curves. It doesn't have any, you know, paint or anything yet. But I'm kind of like structuring it. So then that way I can polish it. So then you go, oh, it's not wood, it's a chair. Right? There's a big difference between a piece of wood and a chair. And that's what I mean by Greyboxing. It's fine when you're just doing it yourself, where you're testing ideas for yourself. But if you want to show it off to somebody and get feedback, I would say kind of like show it off kind of like mediocre-ish, like not ugly, but basic, kind of bland, with no like extra features, maybe no hair, no illustrations. I don't know about having fun with Greyboxing. Having fun with Greyboxing, it could depend if you have the idea in your head where you go, okay, this is gonna be fun, right? In your head, you know it's gonna be fun. Obviously, if you show it to somebody else, they're gonna go, what the hell is this? In your head, you know, okay, this will be something fun, right, Omni? But you're not going to shape and polish the top before you make the legs, right? All right, you need to show us something, right? You don't want to show the piece of wood and show, what do you think of my chair? Who cares? It's a piece of wood. You're not gonna argue with somebody and say it's my chair, but it's just a wood. All right, it needs to be formulated, kind of like put together, and then you can kind of like gray box it, or you can polish it out and say, oh, okay, it's a chair. I see. I think for me, there's sometimes I gray box, but I would say it's more on my head, and I can probably like move things around here and do this. I don't like having like super good art, but I don't like having like, you know, like a, you know, well polished art either. So it's kind of like in between line. It was like a placeholder art. There we go. I would rather much use a placeholder art than Greyboxing. However, Greyboxing is good if you want to get something really fast. Like if you have an idea that you want to test out, you go, oh, I'm gonna put things here. I want to see if this will work. Then I think Greyboxing really works really well. Right? Obviously, you don't have to show it to anybody, but if you test it out yourself and you go, you know what, this idea is really well, and I'm glad I didn't spend 1 hour making like a pixel art, right, for something I'm not even gonna use, or you know, a 3D model on something I'm not even gonna test out. But I would say yes. So it's kind of like a yes, it works, Greyboxing, but only if you're like using it temporarily just for testing it out. And if you can say, you know what, this idea that I had, I'm glad I didn't do the plan art or spend an hour on it, because then I realized it didn't even work out in the end. Or it could be like pushing a box, for example. You know, that's Greyboxing. Simple, plain. You put it in, and then you realize, nah, it looks ugly. That was a bad idea. That happens to me, right? I would say don't spend time when you don't need to spend time for doing those sort of projects. All right? If you don't need to spend time, don't do it. That's where Greyboxing is really great. It's fast, it's easy, and if it didn't work out, you can just delete it and you go, oh, okay, bad idea. On to the next thing. So yeah, I would say a little bit of both, a little bit of Greyboxing, and then yes, a little bit of having an art in there that you can later on polish. So yeah, I think both of you guys are right. And I think on the Discord he mentioned about Slay the Spire, where if you didn't have like a nice art, the player would not know what the heck was, well, what the heck the game was about. But in that case, yeah, those are games where it's like kind of like polished out, where they have the idea already in place and they have the design already implemented. It doesn't have to be 100% done or polished, but it could be just placeholder, kind of like how I'm doing for my zombies, my houses, that sort of thing. They're temporarily art, but a good enough art where you can say, you know what, this is these tubes, for example, I might change these tubes, like these ground here, that sort of thing. These trees, maybe they're okay, they're low poly, but maybe I might change them around. I might make them a little bit nicer. That's why I think it's important to have some art, but not well polished art, and then Greyboxing just for testing out ideas. This is why multiple passes are so important. I agree, multiple passes are very important. You have to play test it, get a vertical slice, where you can say, you know what, this is good, this is bad, people don't like this sort of thing, I'm gonna delete this, I'm gonna push this somewhere else, and then I'm gonna take this aspect out. There's a lot to go with game development. It's not like an easy cut and dry, okay, we're gonna make my prototype, people are gonna love it, done, release. It's not like that. You have to make a game that, you know, passes certain tests, I guess you can say, right? Certain, you know, issues, like certain testers, you know, slicers, I guess you can say. Or if the play testers say, you know, this has an issue here, you can use a feature here, or you can change this tree here and make it nicer. Yeah, I agree. That's my thought on Greyboxing. I like it. I love it. I like talking about those topics.